Had to ask myself what day it was. It is Wednesday. Happy Wednesday. And welcome to our Lunch and Learn that is brought to you by Pocketed. Now, I did pin a message in the chat for you to sign up for your free Pocketed account. Ben is going to talk to you about that, and he's going to talk to you about how to use the platform and how to make sure that you can find the funding that is available for you and your business. Enough of me, even though I didn't really introduce myself. I'm Dwayne. If you don't know me, I'm the founder of Canadian Small Business Women. We love having things like these where we give you all the information you need to build your business. But I also don't want to waste your time. You're not here to see me. You're here to really get all of the knowledge. So enough of me. I'm handing it all over to Ben. And remember to drop questions in the chat. Thank you.
Dwayne, thank you so much. And of course, thank you for inviting myself and Aditya here today. We are so excited to be here. And I know there was a lot of work on the back end to get this session set up. So thank you. Super excited to be here with all of you. Now, I'm going to start my screen share here. I've got a slide deck we're going to have for the duration of our presentation today. And Aditya and I are really, really excited to be talking to you about grant funding today. And of course, our session titled Get Grant Ready, Grants 101 and Writing Basics. We're going to teach you everything you need to know to feel super confident to get started with grant funding and, of course, to submit winning applications. Now, before we get started today, I wanted to do a quick personal introduction. So, hello, my name is Ben. I'm the Partnerships Program Manager here at Pocketed. I'm also employee number one. So I've been around with the company for a long time, well, about 2 years. That's how old we are. But I've seen us grow from just an idea, in our founders' minds to what we are today, helping over 8,500 businesses across North America get easier access to grant funding. So that's a little bit about me. Of course, I've got my colleague here on the call today, Aditya. Aditya, did you want to do a really quick intro on yourself as well?
Sure thing. My name's Aditya Banerjee. I'm a grant writer based out of Calgary, and I've been working with Pocketed for about 15 or 16 months on a contract basis. So I'm really proud of how far the company's come in the last year that I've been working with them, and really excited to share some of what resources are available to all of you today with us. So you'll hear from me a bit later. Ben's by far the main expert here.
Not at all. But Aditya, thanks for that. And yeah, we've been working with Aditya almost since day one as well at our company. So it's really a pleasure to have him on the call here today. And he's helped many users, both at Pocketed and through his own personal grant writing practice, access grant funding, for their businesses. So super excited to get started. Now, before we hop into the agenda, I want to hear a little bit more from you. So in the chat, let me know where you're joining from and what are you really excited to learn about today from our Get Grant Ready session. Perfect. So I see some notes rolling in here. We've got Natalia. They are, providing business solutions, business optimizations, business plans, and they're looking for marketing funding, website design, and advertising. So it sounds like Natalia is really excited to learn a little bit about that. It looks like Ivana is looking to access some grants or for equipment, which is fantastic. So we'll definitely be talking kind of generally about grant funding, and I have a few specific programs as well I'll be highlighting. It looks like Tammy here is writing grants on behalf of 2 communities. So it looks like Tammy is really looking to get some more information just about grants in general and how they can really position themselves better to write stronger applications. So this is really wonderful to see that folks are joining for a variety of reasons today. Some folks, it sounds like, are kind of brand new to the process, and others are a little bit further along, but looking to get some better insights on how to position themselves better for these application processes. So thanks for the input there, everyone. I will, throughout the presentation today, be asking a few more questions here and there just to keep everyone engaged, and so that we can get a good sense of if you're really soaking in the material, or if there are some things that we should be covering a little bit more in depth. So with that, I'd like to just run through a quick agenda. So what are we going to cover? We're going to start off with Canadian grant basics. So this is going to be everything that you need to know, especially if you're a novice to grant funding, to get started. Then we're going to go through some common grant misconceptions. Obviously, here at Pocketed, our everyday is grant funding, and so we hear a lot of misconceptions from folks who are just getting started, and we want to clear the air before you get started. Then I'm going to highlight a couple funding opportunities that are specific to you that you could leverage now. Aditya is going to take over for me at point 4 here for our grant writing workshop. This is going to be a really powerful part of the presentation where Aditya is going to cover things like eligibility and preparedness, some common errors that Aditya sees that then cause applications to be rejected, tips for writing a strong application, then of course some information on when to engage a grant writer. And then finally, we are going to close out with a platform walkthrough. I'm going to talk about using Pocketed as a tool, and then we'll have some time for some Q&A at the very end. Now, I always find it very helpful to start these sessions off with a bit of an overview and a very quick point-by-point overview on some of the common funding opportunities you do have as a founder, as a business owner, as a manager in a business, and where grant funding kind of sits into that. And of course, we're going to talk more about grant funding all throughout the session today. But I wanted to look at this list really quickly so we have a good sense of kind of what else is out there and how does it kind of relate. So of course, right off the bat, we've got, debt financing, we've got loans, your typical, bank loans or business loans that you may be getting for, for a variety of projects within your company. Now, debt funding and loans are fantastic. You can definitely use them in conjunction with other funding opportunities that are on this list. The one thing that you should definitely consider, especially when we're talking about grant funding in comparison, is that with loans, you're going to be paying these funds back, typically with interest, and you will have to put up some form of collateral when you do take those loans into your business. I'm not going to go into too much more depth than that. The next one we have on the list, of course, is friends and family funding, a great way for early stage founders or growing businesses to get that maybe first round of pre-seed capital onto their team to execute maybe some hiring or maybe some product development. Friends and family is great. Of course, one thing that I always like to say is to consider that your friends and family might not be professional investors. And so you should use caution when approaching them to ask them for funds with the reality that those funds may not be coming back. Then, of course, you have crowdfunding, many different ways you can go about crowdfunding campaigns, whether it be through equity or debt or through gifting. And then, of course, we also have investors. So we've got VCs, angels, great way to get a large amount of capital into your business, but many things to do to get to that point when you are investor ready. Now, of course, I've got grant funding with a little sparkles beside it. Our favorite way to get started and a great source of funding in tangent with many of these other funding opportunities to extend your runway and get some extra capital into your business. As we go through the presentation today, you're going to see how grant funding very much differs from these other opportunities that are out there and available to you, including debts and loans, friends and family, investors, and how you can really leverage it, whether you're just getting started with that third-party capital, or if you're a little bit further down the road and you are looking to get just a little bit of extra capital into your business and maybe you haven't considered grants just yet. Now, I want to ask another question back to you. Now, I know we had some chatter, in the chat box about folks who are looking for specific types of grants, but I would love to know, have you used a grant before? Let me know in the chat. I want to see who on the call has used a grant, and maybe you can even say what that grant was if you have. Here at Pocketed, of course, we have used many grants for our own internal team. Actually, in 2021, we actually leveraged over $750,000 in grant funding to expand our team and grow our product, which is very, very impactful. Of course, we're familiar with grants. That's why we launched this product, to make it easier for folks like yourself to access grant funding and be successful. And so I'm just seeing some chat or some responses coming into the chat here. It looks like Catalina Dunn has never used a grant before. So Catalina, super excited to have you on the call today so that you can learn a little bit more and really get started with leveraging grant funding. Natalia, yes, Can Export has been used by Natalia for another company. Can Export's a fantastic program. I know Aditya is very familiar with that one as well. Tammy, it looks like, has used the Ontario Arts Council grant, which is a really good one. Tammy, it sounds like it worked out for your business. And then Heather, not quite yet. So thank you for the responses in the chat. We've got 4 responses here, 2 yes, 2 no's. So we've got a pretty even split based on that small sample size of our group today. of folks who have used grants and folks who haven't. And I'm really excited to share that there will be something for everyone in this session, from the kind of intro content that I'll be presenting about grant funding in general to Aditya's grant funding workshop. Whether you used a grant before or you have not, there is going to be something for you. So I'm super excited to launch right into the content. So we're going to start off with an overview of the Canadian grants landscape, right? We're going to talk about what are grants, what is out there, what is available to you, and where are we going to start? We are going to start with a definition of grants. So for those of you who have never used a grant before, you may be thinking, of course, what are grants, right? Well, very simply put, grants are a form of non-dilutive capital that helps you grow your business. And it'll help you grow your business in a variety of ways, and we're going to talk about this. But what I want to focus in on is this term non-dilutive capital. Now, this is a term that we use a lot at Pocketed, and we understand that it may not be common vocabulary for everybody who's just coming to grants for the very first time. And so what I want you to know, and I want to define non-dilutive capital for you. So we look at this in two pieces, right? We look at the fact that grants are non-equity and they're non-debt capital. So the non-debt piece, pretty easy to understand. You do not have to pay these funds back to any third party that is giving them to your business to use. So grants are going to be distributed by grant administrators. You're going to get those funds to use in your business. You do not have to pay those funds back, meaning they are non-debt. Now, the non-equity piece means that you do not have to give up any percentage of ownership, so no equity in your business, to bring these funds into your organization. So unlike investors or sub-crowdfunding campaigns, you are not giving up any share of ownership in order to access these grants and access this funding for your specific organization. So those two components, non-equity, non-debt, that's what we think of when we use that term non-dilutive. And non-dilutive is really focused on the non-equity piece. But when we say this non-dilutive capital, we are talking about non-equity, non-debt funding. And grants, of course, fit right into that. We also have things like tax credits and business competitions, but of course, we're focusing on grants today. So when you're thinking about grants, I want you to think non-dilutive, which means non-equity, non-debt. Now, the second thing we really need to define here is, how does grant funding work? Now, there are a couple keywords I have on the screen here. I've got projects, I've got cash up front, and I've got reimbursements. And I'm not going to dive too much into the projects piece because I know Aditya is going to be talking about this during his grant funding workshop a little bit later in our presentation. But one thing I'm just going to say now is that you are going to want to focus on identifying projects you need funding for before approaching grant funding. That is the perfect place to start. Now, once you identify those projects, you're going to be moving into finding a grant that is going to be able to cover a portion of those project costs. Now, grants are earned capital, so you're going to be applying in advance of project execution. Now, I'm going to say a slight caveat. There are some grants that will back fund or retroactively fund projects that you've run in the past. But typically, they're going to be earned capital for future projects, and they're going to cover anywhere between 50 to maybe 100% of project costs. Typically, we're going to see that 50 to kind of 75%, and there are some examples that do fund 100% of project costs. Now, you're going to apply in advance of the project, but the important thing to know is that you're going to need some cash up front or some cash on hand today to begin executing that project. And then you're going to be reimbursed at a later date, whether that's partway through the project timeline or at the end of the project. Now, this is something that not everyone is familiar with. They maybe come to grants, they've heard a little bit about it, and they think, okay, I applied to grants and I'm going to get the funds right away, and then I'm going to be able to use those funds for X project that I am hoping to execute. And that is not the case. In pretty much every case in Canada with grant funding, you will need to have some cash up front to begin executing that project. Then you're going to be able to submit that documentation on expenses incurred, and then you'll be reimbursed on those expenses. So I really look at it as kind of 4 key steps: identifying the project you need funding for, applying to a grant that will fund that project, executing that project, and then reimbursement through that documentation process. So those are the 4 key steps that I want you to be familiar with as you are approaching funding for the very first time. I'm going to take a quick pause and just check the chat box because when I share my screen here, I kind of get some of the screens blocked, so I can't see everything. Great. Doesn't look like we have any questions right now. If there are any questions, of course, please put those in and I'll take pauses throughout. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is what projects can I fund? So there are 4 core categories of grant funding, and I have those on the screen for you. So there's R&D, which stands for research and development. There is hiring, there is training, and then there is market expansion. Now, over the last 2 years, we saw a special 5th category, which was COVID-19 recovery funding. Now, most of the COVID-19 recovery funding has closed or is in the process of closing up. So this is going to be something that is going away. But the 4 core categories, research and development, hiring, training, and market expansion, are going to be crucial for you to know as you move forward and look for grants in the future. Now, we can identify projects within our organization, and we're going to want to fit them into these categories, right? So let's say, for example, we are doing a marketing project. We're looking to maybe, put our product to market for the very first time, maybe get some social media running. How are we going to be able to do that? Well, a couple ways we could fit a marketing project into these categories. One, of course, we could look at hiring an individual to come in and do that marketing work for us. If we are expanding to a new market, and that means we are marketing in a new international market, then of course we might be able to fit that and cover some of those expenses into market expansion grants. So the 4 core categories are really important to know. You should know what projects you can fund, and that's going to help you save some time. And Aditya, again, is going to talk about this a little bit more later in our grant funding workshop session. Okay, so you may be wondering, how much funding is available? What is out there? How much funding can you leverage? Now, we look at the total figure of $5.9 billion available annually in Canada in non-dilutive funding to grow your business. Now, this is about $2.9 billion in grants, about $3 billion additional in tax credits. This is a lot of money that you can be tapping into. And of course, you're not going to be able to take advantage of all of this funding for yourself, but like I shared in my example earlier, here at Pocketed, we've used $750,000 for through grant funding for our business. You can definitely take advantage of a large chunk of this total pool to grow your business and really execute some important projects. Now, the cool thing about this is that this number is not static. It does fluctuate year to year, depending on how much funding is being injected into the market by the federal government and, of course, provincial governments and private institutions. But we typically look at this number as a rough statistic for how much funding is available for you to take advantage of. Now, I know we're talking about Canadian grants, but I really wanted to really quickly highlight how much funding is actually available in the United States, because I know we did get a question in advance that mentioned the United States. So I think we may have some folks on the call here today who maybe have both Canadian businesses and American businesses. So for anybody who does have a US-based business, there's actually about $150 billion available in this category of non-dilutive funding in the States. Now, it's primarily made up of 2 large programs called SBIR and STTR. I'm not going to talk too much about these today, but I do want you to know that there is a lot of funds available for US companies as long as you're working in the right space. And typically that's going to be kind of more of an innovation space. If you're growing, building new product and doing a lot of research and deep tech research in the United States, there is a lot of funding for you. Okay, great. So interactive session. I've got another question for you. I would love to hear in the chat, when do you think it is the right time to apply for grants? Now, I haven't answered this. I'm sure Aditya has an answer to this too, but I want to hear from everybody on the session. When do you think it's the right time to apply for grants? And actually, just as I'm waiting for those to roll in here, I do see a comment from Dwaynia that we've got a question maybe from Tanis. Tanis is looking for grants for product development and obtaining a patent. Okay, great. Dwaynia, yeah, thanks. That's perfect. Maybe when we get to the Q&A session a little bit later, we can talk more about that. Okay, perfect. So we've got some answers coming in here as early as possible. Beginning of the year, It depends what their deadline is. These are all really fantastic answers, and they are all correct. And again, I don't want to share too much yet because Aditya's got some good content for later on in the session. But here's my answer to my question that I posed to all of you. If you need funding, it's time to begin exploring grant funding, okay? So it doesn't matter what company stage you're at. We've seen companies from pre-revenue to very late series access grants. We've seen companies from any industry access grants. We actually helped a small taco food truck. We've helped much larger, more innovation type companies, obviously secure grant funding. The key that I say to focus on is if you have projects and desired business outcomes that you need funding for, it makes sense to see if there is a grant that fits that need, right? You may begin to explore, you may find that there isn't the perfect fit in grant funding for exactly what you're looking to achieve, but it doesn't hurt to begin exploring to see if there is a grant, maybe a simple grant that you can apply to, in a day or two, and get some extra funding. If it's not the core source of funding for that project, at least a little bit of additional funding for that project to help you get to that next stage. So if you need funding in your business, it's definitely time to begin exploring grant funding and seeing if there is something out there that you could apply for. Okay, so I just talked all about the great components or the components that make grant funding fantastic, right? We looked at what is it, how much funding is out there, how you can go about seeking out those funds. So why do we talk about grant funding so much at Pocketed, and why do we find that so many organizations that could really be utilizing grant funding are not utilizing it to the extent that they should be? And there are really three key challenges that we uncovered in our process of building product and launching product to market. And I want to highlight those for you today. So the first challenge is that locating grants is and can be quite challenging, right? There are many grant funding programs in Canada, many grant administrators, and of course, many rabbit holes that you can fall down as you begin to go through this search process. In Pocketed in our database, we have over 1,000 opportunities for you to look at. Of course, with $5.9 billion, there are many grants and many tax credits that make up that total value. And when you were just getting started with grant funding, and I know we have folks on the call who are just getting started with grant funding, knowing where to go and how to seek out these grants and how to navigate the 1,000+ programs that are available can be quite time consuming. And as business owners, as leaders in our organizations, we don't necessarily have that time to dedicate to that search, right? And we want to see a strong payoff. Of course, if we spend that time searching and we come up to a dead end, we're not getting anything out of that. So we want to be careful how we're allocating our time as business leaders and business owners. And so that's really challenge one. Now, challenge two is that requirements can be quite tricky to navigate, right? Once you find a program that you think might be a good fit for you, there's likely going to be a list of requirements, eligibility requirements and application requirements that may not make sense to you, kind of the jargon and lingo that they're talking about as a first timer coming to grant funding, right? And finding those requirements can also sometimes be a challenge. I use MyTax as an example here. If you're looking for the requirements to apply to a MyTax program, you typically have to click through a couple links. You might be visiting their FAQ. And again, that's more time that we're investing into the process, that might, end up with us coming out empty-handed. Now, I love MyTax. It's nothing against MyTax funding, but just a good example of how sometimes requirements can be tricky to navigate and can be tricky to find. Now, the third piece, and this is really one where Aditya, as a grant writer, really helps out, is that applications are time consuming. And of course, this varies. There are some applications that are quick, but there are many applications that can take you a lot of time to get all your documentation together, to write that application, to submit that application. And of course, success is not guaranteed, right? And if you're spending a lot of time, again, as a busy business owner, as a busy business leader, writing these applications, and you're not sure if you're writing them, to the best of your ability or positioning your business as best as you can be, and then of course you don't come out successful, that is a huge loss. as somebody who is strapped for time and trying to dedicate and allocate their time very carefully. The other thing is that applications can be repetitive, right? There are a lot of common fields that Aditya is going to talk about a little bit later that repeat from application to application. And if we're doing that every single time and we don't necessarily have a tool to help us with that, that can be a little bit of a turn away from getting started in the first place. So those are the three common challenges that we really identified, both internally with our own process of going through grant funding, but also with over 100 entrepreneurs in our network that we talked to before launching Pocketed. And so those three were, of course, locating grants is challenging, requirements are tricky to navigate, and applications are time consuming. And of course, that is why we launched Pocketed, right? We launched Pocketed as a way to simplify access to non-dilutive government funding for North American businesses. And it's really a refreshed take on a relatively dated industry, right? We're trying to get government money in the hands of those who need it most, which is you and your organizations. And the way it works is very simple. You create your account, you build a business profile, then you are matched with eligible funds, kind of like a dating app. Not really. Sorry, my AirPod just fell out. Sorry about that, folks. Clearly, I'm really into the session today when my AirPods are falling out. And then 3, you get access to support these funds. And that's, of course, where Aditya fits in with the grant writing support to make sure you're curating your strongest application. As I mentioned earlier, we help over 8,500 businesses access grant funding, and we're excited to help you too. Just a quick snippet on Pocket there. I'm going to hop into the tech a little bit later, but we're going to get back to the content here, and we are going to talk about grant myths, right? These are things we hear relatively often from newcomers to grant funding, and we want to make sure that we clear these up for you before you get started. Now, the first one that we hear from folks who are hesitant to get started with grant funding is that there are too many strings attached for me to approach grant funding in the first place. Now, when it comes to grant funding, yes, there are some strings attached. Of course, you are going to have to stay within the boundaries and the guidelines of the grant itself, the project that you said you are going to fund. You are going to have to report on those expenses as well. But if you look at it from a different eye, right, we can quickly see that grants offer a lot more flexibility than some other common funding sources, the ones that we looked at earlier today, right? So first of all, you have flexibility in the projects that you're working on. You get to choose which projects in advance of applying to grants you are going to be working on, and then you are applying to those grants specifically for those projects, right? If we're working with maybe investors or somebody who is having a little bit more insight and input on our business, we may be a little bit more restricted on the types of projects we're able to execute on with those funds that are being injected into our organizations. Additionally, of course, you're not going to be held accountable by investing third parties who are expecting a return on their capital. So again, investors, or friends and family who may be expecting to see that money come back to them with a little bit extra on top. That is not the case with grants. And then actually, you are not obligated to spend the grant funding you secured if you can't find applicable use. And this is very much specific to hiring grants. If you apply to a hiring grant, you don't find a specific use, you can't find the right hire for that specific grant that you secured, you don't have to use those funds. You will not be penalized by the grant funding organization, and you can apply again in the future. So very quickly, we can see that while there are, some strings attached, with grants that you have to make sure you're reporting and kind of staying within the guidelines, you have a lot of flexibility outside of that, especially when we are looking at grant funding comparatively to those other sources that we mentioned at the beginning of our presentation. So there are not too many strings attached when it comes to grants. If this is your concern, you should definitely take a look at what's out there. Now, the second grant myth that we hear a lot from folks who aren't too familiar with the space is that if you're not in tech, there are no grants for me. Now, this is completely false. There are a lot of grants for tech businesses, and there are also a lot of grants for businesses who are doing technical work. But that does not necessarily mean that you have to be a tech business to access tech funding for technical work. And it also doesn't mean that there aren't grants in other categories for things like arts, from the Arts Council of Canada, and many, many other industries that do offer funding, to those industries for a variety of projects. Now, one example I really like to use here about using technical funding for a non-tech business would be the example of our clients that are small taco food trucks. So we had a taco food truck sign up for Pocketed here on the West Coast in Vancouver. And they said, look, I'm not really sure that any of the funding here necessarily fits my needs. How can I actually access funding for my business? And so what we were actually able to do for them was to secure them a technical grant to do some technical work. Obviously, they had a back-end system. They also had a bit of an e-commerce place that they were building out. And so by leveraging and positioning themselves based on the project that they were executing, even though they were a non-tech business, they were actually able to leverage technical funding for their business, which is really cool. And this is something that, working with Aditya, you'll be able to do is kind of position yourself in a way that makes you more applicable. And I'll leave that to Aditya to talk more about. Now, the third and final grant myth that I wanted to highlight and clear the air of today is that when I apply does not impact my success. Now, I know, again, Aditya, you're going to talk about this, but I wanted to highlight this in our grant myths because a lot of folks come to us and say, I don't think it matters when I apply. Applying early can actually increase your chance of success, or at least will put you in the consideration stage so that you may have an opportunity to secure those funds. And I have two examples of that. One, Can Export in their previous application cycle only considered applications in the first 2 weeks of the application submission timeline. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Can Export, and I know there are some on the call here today, that Can Export is open for more than 2 weeks, right? And this is a competitive program where they're going to be evaluating your application. But we actually know that they only consider applications in the first 2 weeks of that application period. So even though they were open, folks who submitted later were not actually considered in that process. Now, we also know that our favorite hiring program recently closed in only 14 days. This is an example of a non-competitive program. And in this case, folks who maybe waited a little longer to apply, they weren't sure if it was exactly right for them. They weren't even able to be considered because they didn't apply early enough. So when you apply does impact your chance of success, whether it be through just being considered or, of course, for non-competitive programs, being able to, get your foot in the door for that pool of funding. And I'll leave it to Aditya to talk a little bit more about this, but important to kind of clear the air that when you apply does or can impact your success. Okay, so let's talk about a couple funding opportunities, right? I wanted to highlight some names. So for those folks who are brand new to grant funding, you can be familiar with a couple names. And for those folks who are familiar with grant funding, maybe you're going to be familiar now with a couple new names. So the first two programs that I am going to highlight are both hiring programs. Now, the reason I'm highlighting both of these is because they are both open right now. So if you want, you can actually go and take a look at these on Pocketed and see if they are the right fit for you. So the first one we have here is the iAdvanced Pathways program. This is a hiring program and it is offering $15,000. And I believe that is at 75% coverage. Now, these funds, this $15,000, are designed to really support the employment of folks who have recently immigrated to Canada. And these are internationally educated professionals in a kind of variety of career opportunities, right? So this really provides you a unique opportunity to bring on somebody from, an international foreign market who has moved to Canada in the last 5 years to then come into your business and really make a big impact. And of course, you get some of those expenses covered through this $15,000. Now, I know that our team is offering some support on this program right now. So if you have further questions, of course, they can help you out. And you can find this within Pocketed by signing up through the link that Dwayne has pinned in our chat. Now, the second program I wanted to highlight is the Eco Canada Co-op program. This also is a hiring program that is open right now. And this program is providing up to $5,000 at 50% coverage to employ students in STEM or business. Now, what's really cool about this is despite the name Student Co-op, or sorry, Canada Co-op program, co-op status is not actually required. So if you have any students that you are looking to employ in the wintertime or in the new year, you can actually use this program, whether they are in the co-op program at their institution, educational institution, or not, right? Now, obviously, a variety of requirements here on the application side and eligibility side. But again, if you sign up to Pocketed, and you fill in that business profile, you're going to be able to quickly see if you do match with the Eco Canada Co-op grant, which is open right now and providing $5,000. Now, the final one, and this is actually a tax credit, an R&D tax credit, that I wanted to highlight for you today is going to be the SHRED, or the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Tax Incentive. Now, through this tax incentive, you can actually get up to 35% back on eligible expenses. You can see on the screen here today, this includes things like applied research, basic research, and development. The really cool thing about SHRED is that you can actually use it to claim back some salary expenses on some of your internal development teams. So if you do have, in-house back-end developers or front-end developers, really anybody who's doing kind of, technical development and research type work, you can actually submit that for a SHRED tax incentive, and you can get some of those funds, or expenses, I should say, back. Here at Pocketed, we actually just recently successfully submitted our first SHRED application, and we're getting a ton of money back on our developer salaries. Now, we also have a partnership, actually, we have a collaborative relationship with EY. I'm sure you're all familiar with EY. And so if you do come to Pocketed and you need support with your SHRED processing, we can always make an introduction to folks like that. Great. So I'm going to be handing it over to Aditya now for our grant writing workshop. I'm just going to quickly show these 3 slides again. If any of you folks want to jot down these names and take a look at them later in the Pocketed platform. The first one is the iAdvance Pathways. The next one is the Eco Canada Co-op grant. And the last one is the SHRED, or the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Tax Incentive. So Aditya, over to you for our grant writing workshop.
Thank you, Ben. Ben's been building me up this whole time, so I hope I meet your expectations now. Moving on to the first slide, please, Ben. So just a quick little caveat on the title of the section. It's called the Grant Writing Workshop, but I think, really there's no way in a short amount of time, even in a matter of a week or two, that, we could really teach you how to grant write, like the actual writing part of it. So what we're really doing here is it's a grant application workshop. It's helping you determine, based on the grant you'd like to apply for, whether or not you need grant writing and sort of what other steps to consider. So the first and most important thing is the eligibility of the particular grant or funding that you'd like to apply for. This is the equivalent of trying to go to a vehicle registration office to get a driver's license when you're too young. Like, there's just nothing that they can do for you other than say, come back when you're of the right age. So it's very much a yes or no thing. Eligibility will vary around a few different components. So one will concern your business, and that will be things like, I will cover some of these a bit later in the next slide, but these will be things like where you're located, how long you've been in business, the kind of business that you do, and that sort of thing. So it'll be tied to business, government priorities or funder priorities within a particular sphere or geographic location. The second will be around the business owner. Sometimes, we see a lot of grants that are designed to help business owners that are either underrepresented, and that will include a broad definition, including females, LGBTQ plus business owners, owners that are visible minorities or Indigenous or newcomers to Canada. So something about the business owner determines, is what the funder is looking to fund, and that will determine the eligibility. And then the third area is around project activities. So, like Ben mentioned, there are projects, there are funding avenues for market expansion, research and development, hiring, training, and then a few other areas as well. You've got to line up with one of those, otherwise it's not for you. So, while this really is the most important step, because it'll be the very first process of elimination for the administrator, like, are these people eligible for the grant that they're applying for? It's not the only thing. So there's a difference between meeting your minimum eligibility for the grant and your likelihood of success. An example would be, Ben mentioned, one of the most common, most popular programs that Pocketed offers grant writing and managed solutions for is it's called SWIP, but it's the student work placement program. Most of the recent ones that we've seen do have a focus around IT and tech hires, and within that there is a hierarchy. So if you need a programmer or a developer that's going to incorporate machine learning or artificial intelligence and high-level coding, that's a much more attractive ask for the funder than if you need someone to do digital marketing or social media marketing or website design, that kind of thing. It's just how the funder determines their priorities. So there is a difference between eligibility and likelihood of success. But one thing I would like to emphasize here is be creative in the sense that you might be more eligible than you think. So Aria Han, who's one of Pocketed's co-founders and the CTO, she always gave me the example of, if you might not think of yourself as a tech company, but if you have a website, an e-commerce platform, you're looking to grow your market, your business through digital marketing and advertising, well, then you do have a tech component, or in some ways you are a tech business. So be creative in thinking of what activities you do might fit in with the requirements of the grant or the funder, but use your good judgment on that area. So that's what I would say there. Just a word around preparation. A lot of these grants that we're talking about today will have a funding cycle to them. So and generally that kind of repeats year after year. So being aware of what the timeline is, not just for the current open grant that you'd like to apply for, but also being aware that, okay, well, when it closes, it'll probably reopen again next year, especially if it's a government program that is running over several years. And you can kind of position yourself and say, okay, well, we may not be ready just right now, but next time when it reopens, or if they have an intake period 2 or 3 times a year, then you'll know, okay, we can now get ready for the next intake period, which is in 3 months, that kind of thing. So it's good to be aware of that. And any grant application is going to have a certain amount of content that you can predict for in advance. So that they're going to ask you, basics about your business, basics about what you're looking to fund, and maybe things like copy of your business plan or your financials for the previous 2 years, that kind of thing. So those are all things that that any grant will probably require, and you can always have those kind of ready in your inventory, so that you're just customizing a percentage, maybe 50%, maybe 30% of all your content for any given grant, because a lot of it can be reused. And as you start grant writing, or you start having a catalog of past programs that you've applied for, you'll just have content that you can copy, paste, edit, and reuse as need be. So that's another positive there. The one area I'd just like to spend a little bit of time on is this idea of thinking in terms of projects. So with the exception of some of the COVID type funding that Ben mentioned, which is now expiring or has expired, almost no funder will look to fund existing operations. You do see that a little bit in the nonprofit world, where they recognize the importance of core funding and telling a charity that you can use this money in any way you seem fit, any way you deem fit. We don't really see too much of that in the business world. So it's kind of expected that you have the resources to continue operating the way you are, or to run your business on a day-to-day basis. So what you do see funding for is projects or activities that will take you to the next level. So an example of that would be, let's say you've got a website, and you pay a certain amount of money monthly to run it and to have all the features that you want. You almost won't ever find funding, for that. But if you package it as a project and you say, okay, well, we need to add a feature to it, a portal or an e-commerce function or something, a scheduling function, something else that we'd like to have. And we're going to, over 6 months, build that, test it out, and then take it to market and, see how that fares. That can kind of become a project, right? And that can, with a clear start date, an end date, some deliverables, goals, targets, and the ability to look back and say, okay, successful, not successful, and why. So that's what we mean by thinking in terms of projects. And really, there's a lot that's open to you, as long as you can, so you can almost take any activities that you're doing and package them as a project, and then there's a good chance that some grant somewhere will look at that as a viable product that they would look to fund. So maybe just in the interest of time, Ben, we'll keep going, and then if anyone has any questions, then we'll definitely give you a chance to ask them. These are just the basic business information questions that almost every grant, no matter how small or large, will ask of you. So basics like your CRA number, a little bit of a description on what you do. Could be a couple sentences or a paragraph, or it could be longer. Sometimes they may just ask you to attach a business plan or a slide deck, and they'll accept that. But in any case, you'll always have these questions on any application. So where you're located, your contact information and title, and the business start date. So a business doesn't always have to be incorporated. Sometimes a sole proprietorship is okay. But generally, what they're looking for in this case is they want a certain level of maturity as proof or evidence that the business can do the project and use the money as promised. So various grants will have various requirements, but those are why they often have these minimum requirements. And the other minimum requirement that we often see is a revenue amount. So maybe $100,000 in revenues in the previous year or the previous 3 years, or a minimum number of employees. Again, that's just because they have minimum requirements. Thanks, Ben. So some common errors. First of all, we have here what I call tier 1 errors. And these are the ones that I kind of really say are kind of unforgivable to make, because you are eliminating yourself at the very first step, and they're completely avoidable. So obviously, if you miss the deadline, if you're not eligible and you're still applying, hoping that they'll not notice, or that, they'll like everything else that you do, like that kind of thing doesn't really work. Not answering the questions required, or meeting the funder requirements, or making other basic errors. So let's just say, for example, you incorrectly enter your CRA number. Now, if you're lucky, the grant administrator might come back to you and say, there's an error, please correct it and resubmit. That's still going to take a bit of time to go through all that. If you're unlucky, and then what will happen in many cases is that they'll just say, okay, this CRA number is wrong, so we're just going to reject the application. So really, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot by doing those kinds of errors. What I call tier 2 errors would be errors in the application, weaknesses in the application. So it's not that you've made any errors, it's just, you're not as strong as either you could be or as strong as other people are. So if you're unrealistic or overambitious with your project scope, I know it's tempting to think, okay, we're going to say we'll do a whole bunch of things just to make ourselves look more attractive for the money. But the funder knows that, okay, that this is a lot to ask, or there's no way that you can, jump up 3, 4, 5 technology readiness levels in like 3, 4, 5 months. So, you'll get rejected for just not having a clear expectation of what's possible. If you've left out details in the application, that's going to be something that weakens your application. And lastly, if your organization is inexperienced, or if you don't have a track record yet, that can make your application weaker. But also, it's something that's a little bit beyond your control. So I always look at that as, manage your expectations, maybe manage your ask strategically to ask for a smaller amount of money with a smaller scope, just to build a track record, so that when you see the question that says, have you applied for this in the past, you can say yes, and that's going to improve your likelihood of success. And finally, tier 3 would just be what I call grants, where you might have a really strong application and you might have done everything right, but it's just a very competitive environment with very high demand. And there's nothing you can do about that except give it your best effort, but just be aware of that. So to put what Ben said in perspective, the US market is 10 times the size of Canada's. So where we have almost $6 billion in non-dilutive funding, they have 150. That's 2.5 times what it would be if it was adjusted for population. So our 6 billion would be 60 billion in the US because their population is 10 times as high as ours, but they have an additional 2.5 times that in available funding. So just, it is very competitive in Canada. And Ben will tell you that it unfortunately become a little bit more so in the last couple of years with COVID and other cost backs. Thanks, Ben. Okay, I'm going to just really sprint through this really quickly because I think I'm taking a little bit longer than I intended to, Ben. So just the main tips here, and these are just tips for, again, evaluating your requirements around a grant application. Prepare in advance, do as much as you can early on. Like I said, 30-40% of the content of any grant is going to be more or less the same. So you can always start having that stuff ready. One thing that is really beneficial, I find, especially with government grants and grants through community foundations and large organizations, they will always have an opportunity to contact them in advance, either through a 1-800 number or an email or a chat box. And that's a really great way to just get your questions answered in advance. Find out, okay, realistically, are we likely to get this? And then you can make a good decision about whether to apply or not. You can also get real-time information. So right now we know that CanExport is about 85% subscribed or so, even though it's early in the year. So right away, okay, I can apply for this, but it's going to be a long shot. Therefore, let me spend my time on something more valuable, which is next year's application. So little things like that. And of course, determining if you need a grant writer or some additional support. Timing is important, like Ben said, both in terms of when you apply in the government or the organization that you're funding's fiscal year. So if it's a rolling application period where they just say apply anytime until the money is used up or positions are filled, then do that as quick as you can. If you see a competition type grant where it just says, the deadline is August 31st, and you'll hear back from us 8 weeks later, you can almost, in that case, assume that they will not start reviewing applications until they have everybody's in. But even then, they're going to go through in order of the ones that came in first. So just something to keep in mind. You have a higher chance of being successful if somebody is early on in their review process and not, kind of reviewing their second, 200 things application that's very similar to the others. Thanks, Ben. So yeah, writing is important. It's not the most important thing, but it is important to write well and to show that you understand what's being asked of you. So, and that sometimes means you can write a very short amount of text because your points are very clear and they're easy to understand. So again, you won't really be able to improve your writing skills enough in the time that you need to submit a grant. So that's one where you can just do a self-assessment and say, okay, do we need to do this in-house? Can we do this in-house? Do we need help? And also, there are different levels of support you can ask for from a grant writer. You can just ask to have your own work reviewed, in which case it's a smaller process, or you can ask them to actually do the writing for you, in which case it'll take more time. Most important thing here, really, after the eligibility requirements, is the project itself. So you can write a great application, but if your project just doesn't align with what they're looking for or shape up well compared to others that have applied, you're going to not be successful, unfortunately. And part of that also requires showing why you need that funding. So you need to make a clear case for why that funding will help you achieve what you're trying to do, and you can't get that money from elsewhere. So keep in mind that's one of the needs that you have to show. And just remember, think like the funder. So if you got 100 of these applications or more, how good would yours be, right? We all think that our businesses are very important to us and they're very special, but we also have to find ways to make them appear more unique to somebody that's reviewing, dozens and dozens of very similar type projects. So just keep that in mind. And lastly, just when to engage a grant writer. So obviously, if you're short on time or capacity, it's not always just the grant writing. It's often a project management process as well. So there's a checklist. There's, making sure you have all the attachments that are required, that kind of thing. So again, if time is an issue, a grant writer can help you kind of manage your entire application. If you need professional expertise, either around the grant writing, reviewing, or just accurately giving you a likelihood of success based on what you're applying for and what you've done, a grant writer can be helpful there. And also, there's more to grant writing is part of it. It's the process of applying for non-dilutive funding. But the bigger picture, I think, is recognizing what's out there in the non-dilutive funding landscape, and also being able to think and plan ahead. So a grant writer can kind of help you strategize and say, okay, well, look, to be successful for this grant, you'll need another probably 5 to 10 employees minimum. You're at 1 or 2 right now. So just think ahead. When you hit these thresholds, that'll open up to you, and they can kind of build a calendar for you where you can say, okay, when we hit these landmarks, we know that we can immediately go ahead and go down this path. So just a few tips there. If you have any questions, either now or at the end, please go ahead. And I think the most important thing I would say with all of this work, but particularly around around hiring a professional grant writer or funding expert is, we're trying to make you have the best chance of success. And that's the main goal. And sometimes that could be telling you early on in the process, look, really, this is a long shot. I wouldn't recommend it if I were you. Or saying, okay, well, it's worth a shot because, depending on where you're located, let's say if you're in Prince Edward Island, there's a smaller pool of applicants, yet there is assigned funding for the province, you've got a good chance. So it helps kind of assess your chances of success. But ultimately, the grant writer, I would say, will help position your application as well as they can. So they can't guarantee anything, and they can't promise you'll be successful. But I think, you will increase your chances of success if you need one and you use one, because you're getting sort of advice that is at a macro level, right? So it goes beyond what you've seen of your own business, and goes and covers, what they've seen with all of the other clients that they work with. So hope that was helpful. If there's anything else, please, whenever you want to take questions, Ben, we're happy to do that.
Yeah. Aditya, thank you so much. I mean, whether folks have applied to one grant, many grants, or no grants at all, I know that there was information in that writing workshop that will be really, really helpful to them. And I'll leave this slide up just for one more second. Obviously, we've got Aditya on the call here with us today, and he is available to write grants for folks who do need that support. So if anybody is looking for any one of these reasons to engage with a grant writer, get a little bit of an extra helping hand and curating a stronger application. Typically, from what we can measure, we see 3 times more success from folks who are working with grant writers, especially if they're novice to this application process. And so if you'd like to work with Aditya directly, simply reach out to Doinia, myself. Of course, you can reach out to Aditya, but we'll put you in touch to make sure that Aditya can review your specific needs and help you get to that next stage in successfully securing some funds for your business. Looks like we do have a question actually coming in right now. I think probably Aditya, you can see that on the screen as well here. How much is the grant writer charge? Aditya, maybe do you want to share a little bit about your fees specifically first?
Yeah, certainly. So the answer to that question, Ivana, is basically every grant writer will have their own fees, just like any lawyer you go to will have their own fees and payment schedules and requirements. Generally speaking, there are two ways that grant writers will charge their clients. One is an hourly fee, so whatever their hourly rate is times the number of hours that they work on your project. And then secondly is a success fee or a commission on a successful application. So Pocketed's guidelines generally say that that's about generally 20% of the prize amount that the grant gets. So if you get $80,000 and you're going on a success fee at 20%, the grant writer would get 16,000. So there's a choice for you as the client to make, which is, do you want potentially giving up a larger chunk of your winnings without paying upfront, or would you like to either just pay for what you're using, or there's also the third option, which is a hybrid of the two. So it might be a lower hourly rate with a success fee as well. So that's generally that's how the payment works, and it's just between you and the client. Pocketed doesn't really get involved if you're asking Pocketed to refer you to a grant writer. It'll just be off to the side between the client and the grant writer. My fees are generally $75 to $100 an hour, and usually when we work on a project, we'll kind of have a project scope. So for example, a CAN export application, I know, generally speaking, if we're writing it from scratch, it'll take anything from 6 to 15 hours, depending on how much material the client can supply me, and that, so on and so forth. So you can have parameters around, the limit on how many hours it'll take and hourly fee, that kind of thing, and that's open there for for agreement, and whatever you agree on in the contract would be fine. What I would say is around the payment around the payment process. Sorry, I've got a couple different thoughts in my head. Let me just pause there, Ben, and then.
No, please. I think everyone would love to hear them, Aditya and Ivana. That was a great question, because I know some other folks were wondering about that too, and Aditya's totally right. It varies depending on the grant, depending on the grant writer. And so you're going to, outline that scope, that project scope up front, and you'll know how much you're locked in for. But Aditya, yeah, I think everyone would love to hear your kind of additional thoughts.
Thanks. Sorry. The thoughts I was searching for that I couldn't get at the time were basically, everybody wants to set you up for success, and everybody, as a grant writer and everyone else, we all know that people have to watch their costs and things. So when I work with a client, I always say, look, the first time we work together, there's no way of avoiding the fact that you're your best grant writer, you're your best salesperson, you're your best marketer, you're your best at everything in your business. The only problem is that we can't clone you so you can do all these other functions, and that's why you may need the grant writer. So what I always say is, the first time around, there's no way of avoiding the fact that everything that's in your head has to come into my head, and then I can write it. And however you want to do that is up to you. So sometimes the most efficient way would just be to sit down together on a Zoom call, have the application in front of us, and literally I interview the client, or the client can just dictate, or I take bullet points, and then I go ahead and I write the draft. Other times a client might say, okay, we've applied for 3 or 4 grants that are very similar. I'm just going to forward you the last application. And inevitably, if I get that, then again, like I said, 30-40% of the questions are about the business. That goes right in. If they've applied for a similar grant in the past, or the same project for something else, then it's a lot easier. And then the timeline shrinks. So there are ways to find cost efficiencies. One is, again, how much you can share with the grant writer will simply reduce the amount of time that the grant writer needs. And secondly, if you are a strong writer, or if you have some of those skills in-house and you just want to have your application reviewed, then that can also be, obviously a much smaller project. And that can either be a process that just, depending on what level of support you need, either just literally reviews and edits and comments on your application, or can go ahead and take that and make the corrections. But there are sort of different tiers, and there are different ways of saving costs. The last thing I'll just say about the cost of the grant writer is, obviously you're always, I always say that, no work in this kind of nature goes to waste. And what I mean by that is, if you have an application that you applied for and it wasn't successful, it might feel like that's a total waste, but two things. One is it's a learning experience. You'll have a better sense of why it wasn't successful and what you can do next time. But also you have a lot of materials or content that you can reuse in the future. So if you, were unsuccessful today, but you still went through the services of a grant writer, you'll have a lot of content that you can reuse in the future. And so in that sense, the big picture, like the kind of the, what are you spending on grant writing in a given period of time, over a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, that could be quite manageable. And just sometimes you just have the growing pains in the beginning.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful, Aditya. So thank you for that. And as I mentioned, folks, for anybody, I know Yvonne is talking about, they might be interested in engaging. Aditya is available for those services. So please, do get in touch with us, and we will put you in touch with Aditya so that you can work on that application or review process together. So thanks very much, Aditya, for that. That was a very helpful session, a session within our session. And I'm going to hop back over, and we're actually going to do a bit of a guided walkthrough of Pocketed. Now, of course, today we've been talking all about grant funding. I know I highlighted Pocketed briefly earlier today, but Pocketed really is a tool that is built for you to help you better connect with grants. Now, I know Dwaynia pinned a special link for all of you folks to sign up for Pocketed. I'm going to pull the platform up in 1 second, but I just want to clarify, please do use that special link. And if you do not use this special link and you just go to the website, put in this referral code CSBW, Canadian Small Business Woman. The reason you're going to want to do this is it is going to get you completely free access to the basic version of Pocketed. And for any upgrades that you want to make to Pocketed Plus, which is an upgraded version of the platform, you're going to get discounts on that. So you're going to want to make sure you have this code on your account so that you can sign up for free, and then you can upgrade at a later date or right away if you choose to do that. So make sure, don't forget the referral code. If you use the link that Dwaynia is sharing, it will automatically apply that to your account. So I'm going to stop this share really quickly, and I'm going to pull up actually a new screen share, and it is going to be the Pocketed platform. So give me 1 second as I make the switch. Here we go, and there we go. Maybe not yet. Can people see anything? I can't see that I'm on the screen here. Let me stop this and try it again, because I can't see that it is up there. Let's see if we can work the magic here. There we go. All right, we are live. We've got the Pocket platform on the screen. So folks, when you come and you sign up for Pocketed through the link in the chat there, or we'll share it out as well in a follow-up along with the recording, the very first thing that you are going to do is you are going to build a business profile. And so this profile is going to consist of a couple different things. It is going to have kind of your information, like your incorporation status, the industry you're operating in. It's also going to have things like your company size, as well as some of your project objectives and your desired business outcomes. Very quick, you'll be able to set it up within under 10 minutes, and it is going to save you a ton of time down the road, because what building that profile is going to do is it is going to allow our platform to match you with specific and eligible grants. So you're not going to see every single program, the 1,000+ programs that are in our database. You're going to see a shorter list of grant programs that are eligible on the business side. Now, this is my login here. Now, I'll caveat with saying my business profile, I set it up very generally. I clicked yes on everything, and I filled in every single field. So I have a lot of matches, but the homepage provides us with some good context to get started. Where we'll want to go, though, is the Explore Funding tab, and this is our grants dashboard. So this is where we're going to see every single program that we've matched to on the business eligibility side. For me, I say I have 598 matches. Again, most users are going to see somewhere around 100 matches for you. Still, that's a lot, and we're going to want to reduce that down, and I will show you how. But the first thing we're going to look at is our list of matches. So right here, we're going to see individual cards for every single program that we have matched with based on our business profile. And when we click into these, we are going to see all of that information that we need to know to feel confident to then go and apply, whether it be on our own or, of course, through a grant writer like Aditya. So we're going to see things like a description of the program, how much funding is it, the company requirements, the eligible activities, all of this information that we can then say, okay, great. We match on the business eligibility. This also fits the projects that we're looking to execute. I'm going to go ahead and apply to that. And of course, we can see when the deadline is as well. Now, there's a couple other things on the screen here that we can see, and these are actually features in our Pocketed Plus version of the platform. So that's that upgraded version of the platform. We're going to see things like Pocket Grant Intelligence. So insights about this grant, keywords for the application, as well as resources to help you through that application process. Now, we can also do things like save the grant for later and share it out with a colleague on our team. Now, as I said, we're going to want to reduce this list down to programs that are right for the projects we're executing, right? We know this is business specific, but this is a lot to look through, especially if we're clicking through every single program on this list. So right across the top of your screen, you're actually going to have some helpful filters to narrow this down for you. So the first two filtering dropdowns, I want funding for and show me, are going to be some quick start filtering categories with preset backend filters. It will help you reduce the list down based on projects you're running, right? So I want funding for marketing, hiring a new employee. If we click on this, right away, we'll see our list is reduced down to 100 programs. We went from almost 600 to 100 programs that are going to be more specific to the project we're running, as well as the business eligibility that we have. Now, if I clear these and I go into the More Filters tab instead, this is where I can actually pick and choose the specific filters that I want to see grants for. So let's say I want to look at only open grants. I'd like to look at grants only, not tax credits, not competitions. And then I'd like to look at grants in the hiring category. Using those three filters in the More Filters tab, we've quickly gone from 598 total matches to 55. Now, if we go even further and we say, I'd like to maybe hire only individuals who are students, then I can see we went from 55 to 32. And we can keep going further and further. Obviously, there are more filters here like role type, role length. Using these filters, we can quickly reduce that list down to make it more actionable and save us a ton of additional time in this search process. Now, of course, I mentioned you can save grants. You can access those grants later. So if you've done a filtered search, you may want to save those and come back for quick access. Here, you can also track your application progress. So if you have applied, you can track that for yourself. If you're using the funds, of course, you can track that for yourself as well. This really gives you a good historical view on what programs you've applied to, what programs you've had success with, and what programs you may have missed and you may want to seek out again. Now, there are additional resources like booking a consultation, hiring a grant writer, financing a grant, as well as our office hours and knowledge center. But the really important stuff and the really impactful stuff that I wanted to cover today was in the grants dashboard and then the saved grants and the grants tracking. Two last things, you can make edits to your grant profile. So as you continue to scale and grow, you can come in here and change things like company size, annual revenue. That'll reboot the system and show you new matches. And then under the Pocketed Plus tab, this is where you can actually upgrade your account if you do not upgrade upon first sign in. And you've got things like obviously intelligent, email alerts, consultations. And then we also have a Chrome extension, which is a application tool that is going to help you through some of those repetitive things that Aditya was talking about earlier. So that's Pocketed. I'm going to stop this screen share and just go back over to the slide deck. Happy to answer any questions, happy to pop the platform back up, but we really encourage everyone on the call here today to sign up, to create your free account and to begin exploring what grant funding may be applicable to you. And then, of course, once you're into the platform, that is going to make it just that much easier to connect with folks like Aditya to help you through that grant writing process. Now, I'd like to open the floor, the virtual floor, to a Q&A period. So for any folks who have any questions that they'd like addressed by myself or Aditya before we hop off the session today, we would be more than happy to do that. I'm just going to quickly check the comments field here. Ivana, I have created an account. Should I create another one? Ivana, if you have created an account and you did not use the referral code, please just let Dwaynia know. She can send me a note and then I will add that to your account from the back end. Kujit, same here. I do not see us have a field for a referral code under my profile as I've created the account already. No worries, Kujit. As we will do for Ivana, we will also add that code to your existing account. Catalina, when you go to book a consultation, it prompts $199. It also says, when I add the code, it says incorrect. Catalina, let me take a look at that. With the code, you should get a 50% discount on consultations. So I'm not sure why that's happening for you. It should be $99, not $199. So just hold off on booking that consultation. You've created an account, which is great. So what we can do then is we can make sure, we'll add the code to your account as well, Catalina. And then we will also make sure that it's active for that consultation discount. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's happening there on that there. Ivana, why are the fees in US currency when you're a Canadian company and focus on marketing Canadian business? So that's a great question. So we do operate in all of North America, actually, Ivana. So we have both a Canadian and US, we have both Canadian and US clients. And so for our payment processing, for us, we have everything in the back end as USD. For any folks who have US businesses, when you're signing up, you can put that into the sign up process, and then you're going to be able to view all of those grants for US based businesses as well. So Dwaynia, maybe if we can just make some notes for Ivana, Kuljit, and Catalina, for those folks who have accounts created already, we can make sure we get that code added on so they get all of those perks and benefits that come along with it. And then for anybody else who is just creating their account right now, simply use that link that Dwaynia has provided, and you will be able to get access to everything that we've talked about, and the code will automatically be applied to your account. So yeah, we'll just take the email addresses from these folks here, Catalina, Kuljit, and Ivana. So whether you'd like to private message those to Dwaynia, you can also share them in the chat, and we can get that sorted for you. So thank you for clarifying that, everyone. Great. Any additional questions, please do feel free to throw those into the comment sections, and Aditya and I will address that. Also, I love the banner that's going across the screen here. Connect with Aditya at Aditya at Hello Pocket. That is very cool. I feel like that is something that you definitely cannot do through Zoom. So that's great to see there. Ivana,
are you jealous, Ben? Are you jealous?
Am I jealous? I'm very jealous. I am very jealous of that. That's very professional. It looks very cool. Okay, Ivana, do we have complimentary consultations? So no, the consultations are going to be $99 to book those. What I recommend for you, if you'd like to get a little bit of an additional helping hand, will be, we do have office hours. So when you sign up in the platform, you can register for our weekly office hours. We have 4 sessions a week. Those are free, so you can sit into the office hours. You can learn a little bit more from some of the other folks who are also asking questions on those sessions. And of course, you can ask questions that you have yourself. But yeah, if you are booking a consultation, you can book that through the platform as well at that discounted rate. And as I said, we'll make sure that we get that CSBW code figured out, because it should be getting that 50% discount. But the office hours, free of charge. You can register for those through the platform.
I wanted to jump on because there were a couple questions that were previously submitted.
Right.
Which business account is best to open as a new e-commerce business selling on a USA platform?
Yeah, so thank you, Dwaynia, for hopping on, and also, yeah, for reminding me that we had those questions in advance. So this question, I was actually hoping to maybe, if the individual who submitted it was on the call here today, we could get a little bit of more context onto what they mean by business account. If you're, so please, if you are on the call, do feel free to provide some further context. If you're asking about what pocketed account and what business type that you should be addressing, or sorry, I should clarify what tier you should be signing up for. I would say this really depends on kind of what stage in the business you're at and what you're really looking to get out of the platform. So if you're just looking at a way to kind of get your foot in the door, to view the programs that are out there and accessible, then Pocketed Basic is a good fit for you. If instead you're looking to get a little bit more out of this, you're a little bit further along in the application process, and you're really looking to have those extra tools to help you through and to apply and to get notified of these grants, and Pocketed Plus is a great option. So yes, as I said, if the individual who submitted that question is on the call and does want to provide some further clarity on what type of business account and what you mean by that, more than happy to address that. But Joanna, that's how I kind of interpreted the question, and I'm happy to provide more context if needed.
If not, and they're watching the replay, I can just follow up with an email, because I'm sure they'll send me an email.
Yeah, of course.
The next question is, if you're a small business owner that makes less than $30,000 and around $3,500 to $5,500 a year, are you required to have an HST number and make a certain amount to qualify for grants?
Yeah, DJ, I'm not sure if you maybe want to talk about this one a little bit. I know as you covered kind of the minimum revenue requirements and these types of things in your writing workshop. Did you want to hop in on this one?
Yeah, I think there were two parts to the question. So the first part was about the requirement for a GST number. I know that on like our personal tax returns, if you make more than 30,000 or you invoice more than $30,000 a year, that's when you need the GST number. So if you're below that amount, that isn't a requirement, but it doesn't hurt to have it and to start collecting GST. So that was the first part, I think. And the second part around the minimum of $3,500 or $5,500 a year. Generally speaking, with those amounts of revenue, you would probably be applying for a grant that doesn't have a minimum revenue requirement. Generally speaking, for the larger government grants, that's mostly what we've kind of been talking about today in terms of non-dilutive funding. The minimum requirements are often $100,000 in the previous year or the previous tax return, or one of the previous 3 years tax returns. So they all vary a little bit. But yeah, so I don't know if I've answered the question completely, but basically, yeah, like the lowest threshold I see consistently is $100,000. So anything below that, whether it's 5,000 or 80,000, would fall under the same category, which is, above or below 100,000. So the answer to the question in this particular case, if there's a grant that has a minimum revenue requirement, it's probably going to be higher than $5,000 or $10,000 a year. But for grants that don't have that requirement, and the requirements might be how long the company's been in business or that kind of thing, then that wouldn't be a factor, or that wouldn't be an eliminating factor.
Yeah, my thoughts exactly, DJ. So that's great. And yeah, just to clarify, some programs do have minimum revenue requirements, and others don't. So if it's one that doesn't have one, you're totally fine. But as the DJ says, if it's any grant that does have minimum revenue, you're likely looking above that 100,000 range. So yeah, that's a fantastic question. And if there's any other follow-ups to that, yeah, we're happy to address those as well.
Yeah, and I will definitely forward the information for the 3 ladies who need their accounts updated. And
Yeah.
Kelly is asking if someone will email when they can book. I'm sure once it's updated, then I don't know, Ben, if you're going to pop them an email to say, hey, your account's been updated, you can now book.
I will. Yeah, I will do that. I'll send everyone an email just to say code's on there, and you're good to go ahead.
Okay. And Ivana, you're asking about currency. Well, I mean, you'll still technically be paying in Canadian. You'll just get the exchange rate of the day.
Yeah, this is true. If you want, Ivana, you can reach out and we can talk with our pricing team. But yeah, everything on the platform is definitely listed in U.S. currency. So then there'd be the Canadian rate, but definitely a 50% discount is a good discount there for you to utilize. But if you want to ask any further questions about that, happy to connect via email as well. Now, I don't see any other questions, so maybe I'll just go to our final slide here. And I want to thank Doinia, of course, you for inviting Aditya and I here today to talk all about grant funding and grant writing. I also want to thank everybody from the CSBW community for being such an engaged group, asking some really fantastic questions throughout. And we're really excited, to welcome you all to the Pocketed platform. Obviously, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but Pocketed is a female-founded, female-led business. Brianna Blaney and Aria Han are our CEO and CTO, both very successful entrepreneurs. And then, of course, we've got Casey Bain, our CMO, and then Jamie Proctor-Boyce, who recently sat down with Doinia for a bit of an interview / grant knowledge session. So we're really excited to welcome, the CSBW community to Pocketed. Excited to, get you that extra help to hopefully put you in a position where you are successfully securing grants for your business and your organization. So, Doinia, thank you everyone, and Aditya and I look forward to hearing from you all very soon.
Thank you so much, because I know I jotted down quite a bit of notes. And thank you, everyone. You will have access to the replay for the next 3 months on this platform. I will follow up with an email for any, added information that you might need. And the platform is open for networking for the next half an hour if you'd like to meet each other and, see about each other's businesses. But until then, have a good Wednesday. It is Wednesday. Yes, it is. Have a good Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone.